which you can now access via BPP locations. And Malora, you can maybe say more about that at the end, exactly which locations are doing it. Okay, so this is the front page of the directory. When you go in, this is what you'll see here. You could start a basic search from this page. Say, for example, I'm trying to fund a food bank in Los Cabos. But I always recommend that you start with the advanced search. So if you see here over the search bar, it says advanced search and filters. You want to click on that. And I think this is a better way to search. It gives you a little more, details. So now I mentioned before about subject areas. Okay, when we talked about that elementary school program. So some of the subjects that you would use would be, say, education or after school programs or things like that. So these are all the categories of subjects. So if you want, you could just browse through here and see what's available. Education is broken down into early childhood education or even graduate and professional education. That's further broken down by law and medical. So you can get very specific here. The other thing you can do if you can browse through this, or another way to search is just to start typing in what you're doing. So say you're providing human services, which covers a number of things. You can just put that in there. Geographic focus, this is where the funding will be used. Okay, so this is important. You can be as broad as just saying Mexico. And if you see that will pop up Mexico, the country, okay? But if that is too broad, if you're getting too many results, you can narrow that down by going for the specific state. So let's say we do Baja California, that's in there. All of the Mexican states are in here, actually. If you just do a search for them, and it will come up, Chiapas, Oaxaca, all of those are in there. So let's say we choose Baja California for this initial search. And as I said, population served, you could narrow this down to age groups. You can narrow it down by ethnic groups. You can narrow it down to health, people with disabilities, say, or religious groups. Anything, and again, you can just either scroll through and look at the different subjects, or you can just start typing what you're looking for. So let's say we're doing children. We're providing human services for children in Baja California. So this is an example of a search. You're this organization, you're doing human services specifically for children in Baja California. Now, one other filter I like to use, if you click here on additional filters, you'll see this year timeline. There's information in the database that goes back to 2003. So I usually like to narrow that a little bit. So let's say we move this and we look at maybe the last 10 years or so. You can do, let's say 2013 to 2023. And I do this because, foundations come and go. Some of them that you may show up in your search are no longer operating, or maybe they've changed their priorities, or maybe they're just not as active in giving as they were at one time. So I try to get the most recent information, and to do that, you can use this year slider here and set it for the last 10 years or even the last 5 years. So this is a pretty typical search. We're going to look for funding for a human services group in Baja California that serves primarily children. So let's click on the button here. Okay, I'm going to take out children because I think that's included in there, and that's why we're getting different results. You can go broader or you can go narrower. Because you're looking at a narrow geography, you probably want to leave the subject area broader. So we're going to just, we're going to skip taking out children, and then we will just do the human services. And I wanted to show you here that what all that human services includes, because it's not just, it's basic aid, it's family services, job services, all of that is included in there. And as I said, we'll just do it for Baja California, and let's see what we get this time. Okay, apologies. I'm not sure why my search isn't working this well today. Let's broaden this out to Mexico. And I just did this search and I got a lot more results, so I'm not sure what's not working now. Okay, if I broaden it to Mexico, now I get 970 grant makers. I'm going to try the Baja California again because it will be a smaller set and it should be more reasonable. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me go back to Mexico so I can show you more grant makers there. Okay. So not sure why that didn't work this time, but this is the first search results page. It'll show you that there have been 970 grant makers who have funded organizations that focus on human services in Mexico. It will show you there were 4,000 grants and 1,200 recipients, but this is just a preview page. This shows you the top grant makers, the top grants, and the top recipients. But what we want to do is we want to look, first of all, look at the grant makers, because that's how you're going to find your list of who you're going to approach. Now, if you look at this, you'll notice that a lot of the grant makers are based here, and they come from a variety of organizations. I'm going to back up just a minute here also and take a look at first the grants. So if we look at the grants, we'll do a view all here. This gives you just a general idea of what types of organizations have received this money and who they've received it from, the grant makers. Now, if you look here, you'll see the recipient country. You still see a lot of United States on there, even United Kingdom. What you can do, if you see the recipient country, this little arrow here will help you sort the results. So if you click on that, and then we're going to click again. So it's starting from the A's, and then you can go down and find, this is where the Mexico organizations start. So this shows you these are all organizations in Mexico that have received funding from different places. Now you'll notice sometimes when you see the same organization, that's probably an organization that's also giving to other nonprofits in Mexico. But you'll see a number of different organizations and who, this is the funder that has given the grants. This is the name of the organization, and you can just continue looking that way. So looking at the grants first just kind of gives you an idea of what other organizations have gotten funding. This is good for you to see because hopefully maybe you've heard of some of these organizations and you can know whether they're doing something similar to what you're doing. So this is one way to look at it. Now, the other thing to do, for example, let's go back and look at the grant makers and see who are these organizations who are doing that. And I'm going to clear one of these filters here. We do have federal funders in here. I'm going to clear that off because most of the time, federal funders are US agencies that are only going to be funding in the US. So I'm going to exclude federal funders by clicking on that. Okay, so now let's take a look at the grant makers. And so you see grant makers from all over the US that have made those grants that have gone to foundations. So let's look at the information that are in these profiles. So for example, let's start with the San Diego Foundation. Okay, first of all, up here, I told you this is where you can see when the profile was last updated. So this one has had new information added just today. And then the grant information was last updated in February. So that tells you that this is very recent information. These first grants give you a snapshot of the foundation for the last 5 years. In other words, what is being funded. So we see here that their main priorities are education, human services, health, and then these other things. So if you're looking for an education or human services organization, you know right away that this funder is very interested in those things. If you're an environmental organization, they're less interested, but they do still have some grants that they've made to the environment. Now, this map shows you where the money is going. Not surprisingly, a lot of it is in California, but this isn't the whole picture. So if you click on the view each state with more detail, it'll give you another map. And over here, you can select world map. And that will show you if they've been giving to international organizations and about at how much. So you see they've made a small number of grants in Australia, India, and Mexico. Now, it seems like they only made a couple of grants in Mexico. So why are they on this list? Probably because they give money indirectly to organizations that contribute to Mexico, but they don't give it directly. In other words, this is someone who probably gives to fiscal sponsors or 501c friends of groups that are based in the United States. And that's why it doesn't show up here. But they have, we know since they're on the list, they have made great grants in Mexico. So let's go back. Oh, I jumped out. Let's go back to the profile. And this also tells you how big the grants are. So on average, a lot of their grants are less than 5,000. But more importantly, this first section tells you where the grants are going. And the most common grant amount is for this particular search. So for example, while a lot of their grants are under 5,000, the most common grant amount to human services organizations in Mexico over the past few years has been closer to 1,000. Now, that doesn't mean that they're only going to give 1,000. That's just the average. So again, we can look at grants that just this funder has given. So just for the San Diego Foundation, these are some of the organizations that they have funded. And as you'll see, a lot of them seem to be California based, but I would bet you a lot of these California organizations give money in Mexico, and that's why they're on here. Okay, so this is a foundation that's probably doing more indirect giving than direct giving. And that's how you can tell. But I want to pop back here and look at another grant maker record. So for example, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which is based here in the US in Michigan. Okay, this is another funder that's high on this list. Again, this shows you what their priorities are: community and economic development, education, human services, human rights. And this shows where the money is going. So you can see that they give all over the US. But more importantly, we're going to click on this view each state. And then we're going to go to the world map. And this shows that they have given quite a number of grants in Mexico, unlike the previous funders. So they've given 182 grants to over 100 recipients. They've given a smaller number in Canada. So this funder is more likely providing grants directly to organizations in Mexico. And you can see that because it shows that they have made a large number of grants in the country. So let's go back and take a look at what some of those grants are. And so if we come down here now, this is a funder that makes very large grants. So their average amount for these organizations is this. So let's take a look at these, because these grants appear to have been made directly to Mexican organizations. And it could be that these are organizations who are also re-granting to groups. But you see, unlike the previous one, all of these are, a lot of their grants have been made directly to organizations in Mexico. They've been made to a variety of different organizations, which is also a good sign. So when people are evaluating whether a funder is good for them or not, this is one of the things to look at. Are they giving to a variety of organizations, or do they just have one or two pet projects? Are they giving directly to organizations in Mexico, or are they giving to organizations that re-grant in Mexico? And these are some ways that you can tell by looking at this. So Kellogg is a funder that gives more directly to more groups directly in Mexico. And Malora, I'm going to pause now and see if there are any other questions.
Yes, Lori.
Mhm.
They're asking what are the requirements in terms of documents
Okay.
that people need to start preparing, and also if they have to be in English. La pregunta es que si cuáles son los requisitos de documentación que las organizaciones deben de ir preparando para estar listos para recibir recursos en Estados Unidos, y si debe de ser en inglés.
It varies for each funder. All foundations are different. They have different requirements as to how you can approach them. Their application process is different, and it will be different in terms of whether they will accept grants or things. And usually if a funder funds a lot internationally, they're more likely to accept grants in another country, but that's information we can also find in this profile. So this is the Kellogg profile. If we look over here on the left, this is the menu for that. So what you want to jump down to are their application process, and this tells you how they like to be approached, okay? And when their application forms, it might give deadlines if they are, this organization appears to accept applications continuously. They have a monthly board meeting. But right now they say, it says, funding is limited to the United States, 2 micro-regions in southern Mexico. So this is how you can find out more information about this funder and how they will accept grants applications. The other thing, this particular funder does, I know, have a website, but you will find funders in here that don't have websites. And that, in that sense, this is the only information you have. But if they have a website, it's best to go to that website to find out this information. The other thing you want to look at in the profile is this about section, because this will also tell you what their main purpose is. Kellogg supports children, family, and communities. That's what they're most interested in. And then these are their program areas. So if you notice, they actually have a program area for international organizations focused on supporting organizations and programs in Latin America, the Caribbean, Northeastern Brazil, and Southern Africa. So a lot of times it will tell you in the programs if they are particularly interested in supporting non-US groups. So looking at the about section, as I said, also looking at the application section. Another important section is the who's who under funders. This gives you a lot of information about the people who work for the organization, and you can find out who to contact if you have questions. So for example, if you were interested in this funder and you wanted to know if they would accept applications that were in Spanish, it doesn't hurt to reach out to someone there to try to find a name. So in this case, Alejandra Martinez is the director of Latin American and Caribbean programs. So maybe you address an email to her. We have these little LinkedIn icons here. That means that these particular people are on LinkedIn, which means if you're on LinkedIn, you can also find out if you have a connection with them, or at least, again, that's a way to send them a message. And at the bottom of all of the profiles, if it's available, there's contact information. So here they provide an address, they provide a contact name, and even a phone number. This won't be in every funder's profile because some of them may only have an address, and that's the only way you can reach them. But here they actually have a website, they have an email address. And then it might help to directly address that to this particular person who says that she's in charge of the Latin American and Caribbean programs. And that's a good one to put your question to. Okay, there are other questions too?
Yes. There's another question about what would be the profile for a funder for a university? ¿Cuál es el perfil de un donante para una universidad?
Okay, you would probably change your search. Let me do that. I'll go back to our find funding. And then we're going to do the advanced search and filters. So if you were looking for education, your subject area, you could do, I would do education broadly. You could limit it to higher education, but because the geographic focus is narrower, because you're just looking in Mexico, I would keep the subject broad. So I would just start with education and then maybe use higher education, depending on how many results you get. So we would try this again for Mexico.
Escogeríamos México también.
Okay, so there are quite a few grant makers.
Entonces hay bastantes donantes.
So I am going to narrow this down again.
Voy a reducir esto de nuevo. a
My
educación
Laura,
superior.
I'm hearing the interpreter. I don't know if I should be, but.
No, Lori, I think that we need to change that.
Okay.
But go ahead.
It's okay for now. Yeah, it's okay. It's not bothering me. Okay, so let's try higher education for Mexico. Okay,
Vamos
so
a
these are the
intentar.
3 organizations.
Estas son las 3 organizaciones.
There's over 300 grant makers, and these are grant makers who would be interested in
Estos
funding.
son los donantes que
And
estarían
what the
interesados
directory really tells you is that these grant
en
makers
donar. Lo
have
que les
made
dicen es que estos
grants
donantes
to
han
higher
hecho
education
donaciones a educación
in
superior.
Mexico. So
en
you know
México.
that they have at some
Entonces
point
saben
made
que
donations.
en algún momento
So
han
these
hecho donaciones.
include,
Estas incluyen.
these are all the funders who would probably
Estos son todas
be interested in
los
that.
financiadores, los donantes.
Now, a lot of funders have more than one area,
Muchos
so you're not going to find funders that maybe are
no van a
just
encontrar
interested in
financiadores
higher
de que
education.
están interesados
They'll be
solamente en la
interested
educación
in
superior.
multiple things.
Van a estar interesados en varias
So for
cosas.
example, I'm gonna look at the Kellogg Foundation, again, comes up in here. So we know they fund a lot of different things, and education is one of their big things, but it's not their only interest. So most funders have multiple interests. You'll find a few who focus on just one area, but most of them focus on numerous areas. Okay, Laura, any other questions?
Yes. Does the essential version provides all the information about how they need our grant request to be presented, LinkedIn, contacts, etc.?
Yes,
es que si la versión
Essential does
esencial
have that information. Essential does not have the information, the direct information about grants and about recipients. So for example, here in this search, you see we also have the outline of the grants. And by looking at the grants in particular, you can tell exactly, for example, this was a university grant from the Silicon Valley Foundation. Now this one doesn't have a description, but sometimes there'll be a specific description of the grant there. That's a detail you won't find in FDO Essential. Okay, you'll only find that in this professional version, which is available at the BPP locations.
And also there are some many questions about the 501c3 equivalency and if that's a similar designation as our donataria autorizada. Let me explain that real quick, Lorraine, from our side in Mexico. Hay varias preguntas sobre el tema de si una organización donataria autorizada en México o no donataria puede recibir recursos de Estados Unidos de una fundación y la respuesta es que sí. O sea, no tienen que tener la autorización como donataria autorizada. A veces hay financiadores que apoyan, por ejemplo, grupos comunitarios, grupos de artesanos, grupos indígenas. O sea, no siempre se necesita la figura legal sí, pero no necesariamente ser donataria, número 1. Número 2, no tienen que tener la deducibilidad en el extranjero para recibir recursos de fundaciones en Estados Unidos. Hay muchas fundaciones que directamente les depositan a su cuenta en México y ni siquiera les piden un recibo ni deducible, porque para una fundación en Estados Unidos la deducibilidad no es, o sea, no le sirve un recibo mexicano para deducirlo una fundación en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Aquí les voy a poner ahorita en el chat la explicación de por qué no necesitan tener la autorización como donataria en el extranjero. Entonces, prácticamente cualquier organización con programas, proyectos sociales valiosos puede recibir recursos de una fundación de Estados Unidos. Aquí les comparto la liga para que lean el documento y conozcan este proceso. Another question, Lori.
Ujú,
Hay otra pregunta
ujú.
para Lori. ¿Hay alguna página para buscar aliados, por ejemplo, Rotarios Internacional? Is there a page to search or a section in the directory to search for allies like Rotary International?
You can look up particular organizations. Yes, there is a place to look up organizations by name. So let's say in this, if we were in the, we're back in the advanced search under organization names. So you wanted to find a Rotary organization. Now there are going to be several Rotary organizations. So I'm not sure. You probably want to limit where they're located, perhaps in California. You could even limit it to a particular city if you were looking for one. But yes, if you're looking for a specific organization, there is a way to look that up.
Okay, if you want to
Okay.
continue, Lori, that's it.
Okay. All right. One other thing I want to show you also, because we have more than just US grant makers in here. So if you wanted to see Mexican grant makers in here, instead of using geographic focus, we're going to use a location focus. So let's say we put Mexico under location. Geographic focus is where the funding will be used. Location indicates where the funder or the recipient is actually located. So most times you would want to use geographic focus, but because you are, if you're specifically interested in finding organizations that are close, and I'll put in education here, you can also do that. And I'm going to put my date limiter again. And if we do this search, okay, you will find just organizations that are physically based in Mexico and who have made grants specifically to Mexican organizations. And if I take off the education, you will get a bigger idea of, yeah. So we have at least 13 grant makers that are actually Mexican grant makers that are in here. So you can look for those as well as looking for US funders that are based, that will give to Mexico.
Lori, there's another question. If you
Yes.
can share other fin locations throughout Mexico. I don't know there are many, but because people from other states are asking.
Right.
La pregunta es si puede compartirnos, Lori, las otras sedes en México de donde puede haber acceso gratuito al directorio para que nos diga, por favor.
Okay, I will share that, and I will also show you how to look for that. We have a website called Candid Learning, and I am going to drop that link in the chat, everyone. Okay, and here at the top, there's this button that says Find Us. So this will tell you what locations, wherever you are, that will provide access for Foundation Directory. So I am just going to, you put in your zip code, I'm going to put Mexico in. Okay, and currently we only have the 3 locations, and in addition to, yeah, the 3. And I think you're not on here yet, Malor. I'm sorry about that. But we do have where the University of Monterrey, it's also in Hidalgo, Sonora, but this is where you can find out which locations are in Mexico or closest to Mexico. You'll also see Texas on here as well. But Malor, maybe you want to say a little bit more about your specific locations where you provide access.
Yes, thanks, Lori. En el chat les pusimos las ubicaciones de las sedes que están actualmente, que estarán prestando este servicio próximamente. Nosotros los daremos a ver. Tenemos ya los correos de todos ustedes porque se registraron este webinar, entonces les haremos llegar información de cuándo van a poder solicitar su cita para acudir presencialmente a consultar el directorio con asesoría y apoyo del personal de estas 3 sedes por lo pronto y próximamente en Mexicali. También les comentaba por el chat que las organizaciones de Tijuana que quieran visitar el directorio, revisar el directorio, pueden ir a nuestras oficinas en San Diego que están ubicadas, ya les puse también la dirección, estamos en Liberty Station, en las instalaciones de San Diego Foundation, de la Fundación San Diego ahí en esta ciudad. Y próximamente, bueno, el directorio también preguntaban, ¿tiene un costo? O sea, este es un servicio que cobra Candid, de ahí pues ellos financian pues su operación, ¿no? Del cobro. Y pues en la página también se pueden suscribir. Este es un acceso también pues que pueden tener desde su computadora. Cuesta la versión básica $50, la versión profesional, que es la que está mostrando, vale alrededor de $200 mensuales. Y sí se puede contratar también ya sea por mes o por el año completo. Entonces es pues hay como todas estas opciones, ¿no? Acceso virtual, acceso presencial en estas sedes y las que mostraba Lori, también por ejemplo esta de Hidalgo, los que anden por acá. Y también pues es un servicio que nosotros ofrecemos a los afiliados de la alianza, ¿no? Entonces como parte de su afiliación nosotros les damos el coaching y la orientación y la asesoría y el acompañamiento para que pues entren al directorio y puedan consultarlo. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay. And I'm going to back up again to the profiles. There was one other thing I wanted to show in the profiles, I believe. Let's go back here. So yeah, so location is where you can find funders that are actually located in Mexico. But as I said, geographic focus is what you want to use for that. I'm going to go back and also see my Baja California search will work this time, because I know there were a number of funders that focus specifically on Baja California. And I think, okay, the results are coming in now. So there are like over about 300 that are specifically, have at some time have made a grant to an organization in Baja California, because that's what it really means when you use geographic focus. Now, in some instances, the other thing I know what I wanted to note. All of these organizations are organized by grant count. So if you look over here on the right, it shows you which grant makers are most active in this area. So this is an example of what I mean by an indirect funder. International Community Foundation actually is also one of our partners, and they do make grants to organizations in Mexico. So they raise money in the US, they get grant money, and then they in turn re-grant it to other organizations. So it's not, the funders are not funding Mexican organizations directly, it's more indirect. So they are very active in that. But then this shows you which funders are most active. When you get down, it seems like it's a lot, 300, but when you get down to the bottom of the list and you see there are only 5 or 6 grants that they've made in the last, say 10 years or so, those are probably the least likely prospects. So you probably want to focus on people who have made multiple grants there. The goal of the search is to come up with a list of potential prospects. So you'll have an A list and a B list. You'll have some that seem to really fit what you're doing. Say their priority is what, exactly what you're working on. So say, for example, the Packard Foundation. If you're an environmental group or health or something like that, these are their main areas. So sometimes you'll find a funder who fits exactly everything. Sometimes you'll find a funder who, say you're a higher university, education is kind of far down the list. They may be a possibility or they may not. So this helps you, but these graphs are important because they help you evaluate the funder. You can't just think everybody on your initial list is going to be a good prospect for you. You have to look a little deeper into what their priorities are. As I said, where the money is going exactly, where they tend to fund. And again, they are a little more active in Mexico than some of the other groups were. And so there's still more work to do after that initial list. So it's a process. When Foundation Center, when we had our libraries in San Francisco, people would come and, spend maybe 2 or 3 hours sometimes coming up with a good list of potential funders for their group. So it takes a little time, but that's the advantage of going in, because there are people there that can help with the search and help you to narrow it down to which funders are going to be most applicable and most amenable to funding you.
Hey, Lori,
So
there's another question.
Mhm.
Can the directory online show pro bono services, like from experts in communications, finance, marketing, that can donate their time to nonprofits?
Not so much. There is a line. Let me go back to the find funding. There is a way to look for people who are donating services, but I can probably tell you a better way to do it. There are, if you look under additional filters and you look at transaction type, they will show you, for example, here it says pro bono services. So you could add that to your search. The only thing I'm afraid of is that a lot of organizations may not explicitly say they offer pro bono. So in that case, they wouldn't come up here. Another way to look for services like that, and again, this is going to be in the US, but they may work overseas. We have a publication called Philanthropy News Digest. And I'm also going to drop this link in the chat. So Philanthropy News Digest is our publication, sort of our news publication, but one of the things they do have, one of the features are there was a classified section on here. And it looks like they no longer have it. But the other thing about Philanthropy News Digest is that they list RFPs. So these are requests for proposals. In other words, this is grant money that comes looking for you for particular things. And let's try, I don't know if there's anything specifically geared to Mexico, but we can look and see if there are any current RFPs that, no, that's for New Mexico. But occasionally there are RFPs or requests for proposal that may go to a particular country or things, and you can do that. You can also set up an RFP alert so that if you want to be notified anytime a request for proposal comes up that fits within that category, you can do that as well. So this is another service of Candid.
Lori, there's another question. People want to know, there's someone from Venezuela and someone from Texas asking whether this directory would provide them information about funders that fund projects in those areas.
Yes, yes, of course. And the same, you would do the same, search it the same way that I just demonstrated. And it's only instead of using Mexico, if we do advanced search and filters, there are multiple countries and cities. The geographic focus goes all the way down to the city level. So if you wanted to look specifically for I'm blanking on a city in Venezuela, but let me see. So yeah, so Caracas is in there, Venezuela is in there. I don't know how many funders are going that specifically say they're interested in that, but let's just try that search. So if you change the geographic focus, you can change it to any country you want. You can change it to a specific city. So yes, there are 250 grant makers who have made grants in Venezuela at some point. That's what this means. It doesn't mean that. That's why I say you still have to review each of the profiles, because if they're on this list, it means at some point they made a grant in Venezuela. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily their first priority. It doesn't mean that they are going to, absolutely fund any organization in Venezuela that applies. It just means at some point they have made a grant in Venezuela. And again, as I said, you can go down to the country level, you can go down to the city, you can choose a particular state. That's what the geographic focus helps you with. So it's pretty broad. All right. Well, we're getting close to time, but I could stay on for a little while longer, my Laura, if there's some more questions.
Let me see, Lauren. Bueno, hay una pregunta sobre el acceso. O sea, el acceso es público y gratuito, o va a ser público y gratuito. Nosotros les vamos a avisar, como les decía, en estas sedes, ¿no? Mexicali, por definir, en Monterrey, en la UDEM, en Ciudad Juárez, en la Fundación Paso del Norte, y en Ciudad Obregón, en el Centro de Formación Social. Lo que sí les vamos a pedir es que hagan una cita para pedir su espacio, y como decía Lori, este es un tema de investigación de tiempos, así hay que dedicarle varias horas, varios días quizás a la búsqueda. Obviamente pues hay que saber pues inglés, hay que saber el idioma, hay que encontrar también la manera de cuáles son como los campos donde es más posible encontrar financiamiento para nuestras organizaciones, por ejemplo, ¿no? Que está el tipo de población, está el tipo de área, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, si buscamos jóvenes y educación, bueno, son filtros que nos van a reducir los hallazgos, ¿no? Los resultados que vamos obteniendo. Y si, por ejemplo, le ponemos otro tema por ejemplo, programa de horario extendido, ¿no? Algo así como palabra clave, bueno, todavía nos va a restringir más o nos va a dar menos resultados, pero entonces, bueno, decimos, bueno, vamos a probar con otro tipo de criterios, con otros filtros para ver qué tipo de donantes nos aparecen, ¿no? Entonces, hay como, o sea, es dedicarle el tiempo, y como cada organización es diferente, cada institución tiene pues diferentes tipos de necesidades. Por ejemplo, es importante que sepan que las fundaciones en Estados Unidos sí apoyan para gasto operativo, que se llama General Operating Support o General Support, ¿no? Que es algo bien interesante para nosotros en México, que no tenemos casi donantes que apoyen el gasto operativo. En Estados Unidos sí. Entonces, existen como muchos filtros que podemos ir reponiendo a nuestra búsqueda para poder tener pues como resultados más acertados, ¿no? Obviamente si nos salen 250, como ahorita mostraba Lori, es un universo muy amplio que no vamos a tener capacidad de revisar. Pero si ya, no sé, por ejemplo, ya estamos en 17, 25 fundaciones, 7, ¿no? O sea, números más accesibles, bueno, podemos dedicarle pues toda un proceso ahora sí, de acercamiento, de búsqueda, y precisamente lo que decía Lori ahorita, ¿no? Irnos preparando con la documentación que se va a requerir, que cada donante es distinto, hay cientos de miles allá en Estados Unidos, cada donante es distinto, y nos va a pedir documentación diferente, pero sí hay ciertas áreas de las propuestas que podemos ir armando, por ejemplo, el quiénes somos, la lista de consejeros, la historia, la información de los programas, la documentación legal, fiscal, mexicana que tengamos, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, pues es como este proceso que se le llama grant readiness, para poder estar preparados para cuando, y en el camino, o sea, yo no digo, yo les digo a las organizaciones, no se esperen a tener todo, ¿no? Para empezar la búsqueda. O sea, empiezan la búsqueda y vayan armando su expediente, vayan construyendo su organización, perdón, su información, vayan desarrollando lo que necesitan y vayan preparándose para el futuro. O sea, ahí hay mucho dinero y no lo estamos recibiendo muchas organizaciones que tenemos proyectos valiosos, ¿no? Lori, do you want to continue?
Yes, one last thing, and this is very important, and thank you all for your attention. Pardon my stumbles today, but if you want to, you can capture this information for yourself. This tools bar here, if you were looking for grant makers, you can download the full profile of those grant makers. You can download up to 10 full profiles. You can save them into a PDF, or you can save 100 records into an Excel spreadsheet, but that's just the minimal information, just the name of the organization, the contact information, just the basics. You can save it in an Excel spreadsheet, or you can email the PDF to yourself. And that's usually in public areas, that's usually the best way to do it, is just to click on that button, and then you can select which records that you want by just clicking on them. Clicking this little box here, and then you can say, email a PDF of these results to myself. So that's also important. So you can, as I said, if you're after your search, you find some grant makers that look really interesting and you want to do some more research on them, you can download those profiles and email it to yourself. So, okay. Like I said, if there are no other questions, that's the end of my presentation. Now, Laura, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add. Again, thank you all for your attention.
Lori, one question was about downloading the information, so you already covered that.
Okay, okay.
Nada más para hacer también una explicación súper breve. Bueno, y en Procapacidad tenemos mucha información sobre este proceso de donación binacional, ¿no? Y una de las preguntas que nos hacen mucho es esto de si tienes que estar, o el equivalente de lo que es la 501c3, la 501c3 que mencionaba Lori. Esa 501c3 es el equivalente a nuestra donataria autorizada. El tema es que una organización mexicana no puede ser una 501c3 a menos que se constituya legalmente en Estados Unidos. Y lo que sí es que hay fundaciones y esto se los podemos mandar también al final por correo, ¿no? O consultar ustedes ahí mismo en Procapacidad. Esta designación en Estados Unidos, hay un proceso que se llama determinación de equivalencia, equivalency determination. Entonces, este proceso lo que les ayuda, pero solamente lo puede solicitar una fundación, es que los equipara a una organización no lucrativa en Estados Unidos, donataria autorizada allá, sin tener que constituirse allá, pero que pues es un proceso también que tienen que pasar, ¿no? Entonces, hay como muchos caminos, hay muchas herramientas. El directorio es solamente una, ¿no? Hay donativos de empresas, hay donativos de personas, hay campañas de crowdfunding, o sea, hay como muchas cosas que se pueden hacer, pero bueno, quisimos presentarles a ustedes la herramienta, presentarles a Lori, presentarles lo que es Candid y presentarles pues también lo que son las sedes que van a ofrecer este acceso público y gratuito previa cita. El webinar va a quedar grabado, les vamos a mandar copia del link, por correo les va a llegar el link del webinar para que lo revisen otra vez si gustan, y también les vamos a hacer llegar por correo a todos los inscritos la información sobre las sedes y sobre pues otros datos que puedan ser de utilidad para ustedes para que usen este tipo de herramientas para buscar financiamiento en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Lori, I don't know if you have numbers of funding to Mexico during last years. O sea, es importante saber, ¿no? Cuánto han dado las fundaciones en Estados Unidos a México.
I'm not sure. Let me take a look at, I can, if I don't know that I can find it right now, my Laura, but I will get that. I see if I can get that information to you,
Okay.
and then you can share it out with the audience. Yeah, I
Bueno,
don't know
sí.
that I know that right offhand. Yeah.
But it's millions, no? So
Oh, yes. Oh,
the
yeah.
possibilities are
If
there.
not more than that. Yeah. Yeah.
Sí, o sea que sí, las fundaciones en Estados Unidos están dando millones a organizaciones en México. Entonces, bueno, pues esperamos que haya sido de utilidad esta sesión. Nos ponemos a sus órdenes en los correos. Déjenme les muestro aquí rápidamente.
Actually, this is another product that we have. It's called Foundation Maps. And this gives you, this gives you for Mexico, the value of grants, 3.1 billion, actually. And these little circles show you where the money has been concentrated, and the number of recipients and the number of grants. So this is not just for US funders. I think it probably includes Mexican funders as well. But this is the value of the grants that have gone to Mexico. And these are the top funders.